They drove across my field like it was a shortcut to the grocery store. First time I saw that Subaru carve a diagonal through my winter wheat, I thought somebody had lost their mind. Then I saw the woman in the passenger seat smiling like she owned the county, and I knew it wasn't an accident. My name's Earl Grayson, and I've been keeping this patch of land in the family since before asphalt had a name. If you want to know what it's like to watch neighbors decide your yard is their right-of-way, picture this. You wake before dawn to check the fence line. You cup your hands around a coffee that's gone cold, and there's fresh tire treads cutting through a crop you planted with your own two hands, not for sport, not for spite, but because some people think property starts where convenience does. That morning rolled into a week, and the week rolled into a war of paperwork, petty power plays, and one surprisingly stubborn backhoe. Denise Porter led the charge. She's the one who always smiled too wide at HOA meetings, wore those silk scarves even when she was on a ladder painting mailboxes, and carried a stack of printed petitions like a shield. She'd grown up in a neighborhood where everyone watched everyone else, and she'd learned how to make that watching into authority. The subdivision she helped run backed up against my son's pasture, and somewhere along the development map, somebody started pretending a dotted line on Google was gospel. Denise decided that dotted line cut right through my beans. I could hear the first confrontation before it happened. She always had a voice built for headlines. She stepped out of her SUV with a clipboard and the kind of confidence that comes from people who never had to explain themselves to a judge, and she said, "This is an easement. We have the right to use it." I told her, plain as a spring morning, "You've got a map, ma'am. I've got a deed." She laughed like deeds were quaint. That laugh lasted about as long as it takes a tow truck to pull a car out of mud, and then it didn't. I grew up working county lines. For 30 years I pushed paper and walked plots and watched kids like me and men like me argue over corners with the sort of patience only paperwork can teach you. When Denise started taking down my "No trespassing" signs twice, I stopped calling it courtesy and started calling it trespass. The first time she tore down a sign, I stapled a second one on right under it. The second time I set up a motion camera on a utility pole. You want to know what makes a person calm and dangerous at the same time? Evidence. There is a steady kind of power in a chain of photos that say the same thing at different times. The backhoe came next because, well, sometimes the law needs to be argued in practical terms. I dug a drainage trench. I called the county, I filled out forms, and I did it by the book environmental check, permits, the whole boring stack of paper people like Denise never want to read. I told the inspector over the phone I was doing it to prevent soil erosion, because that's true, but I also told him it would make it a lot harder to drive an SUV straight across my land. When the machine started, the whole neighborhood came out to see what an old man with a noisy toy could do. Denise called it a stunt. She called it an eyesore. She called me an obstructionist, which was a new one, but I wrote it down because, as I said, I like evidence. She tried to rally the homeowners. "This is unsafe," she said, and she sent a formal complaint to the HOA board, which, predictably, wrote back in the language of neutral concern and passive threats. Meanwhile, folks started filming with their phones. People love a show where the underdog does something practical and the entitled person gets stuck, which is exactly how it went. One bright Sunday, Denise jumped in her SUV to prove the trench wouldn't stop her. I was standing by the tractor, coffee in hand, watching. She gunned it like the whole development depended on her making that crossing, and the rear and slid into the silt like a toy in quicksand. 30 seconds of bravado turned into a long, embarrassed push. 3 neighbors with ropes, a tow truck with a wink, and a cell phone clip that would be framed as Exhibit A in the court of public opinion. I took no pleasure in her embarrassment, not much, but I did take comfort in the fact that the bite of real soil is different from the bite of entitlement. We did the legal steps after that. I filed a formal property dispute, showed up at the HOA meeting with my deed and a 1962 survey that still smelled like old ink, and watched Denise try to spin a story that had no paper trail. She was theatrical. I'll give her that, slamming her palm on the table like she could dent history, but the documents sat between us like a calm man at a poker table. There's a rhythm to legal things, the waiting, the small revelations. You lay out a little fact, you wait for the tilt of a head. The board, who had been trying to keep everyone's commitments inoffensive, suddenly had to count what was on paper against what people wanted to believe. Then, the bridge appeared. You can laugh, and I laughed at first too. Someone had hauled a tiny, garish wooden bridge across the trench and painted it a bubblegum pink. Someone left a sign, Porter Crossing. It was absurd, like something a prankster would leave to puncture a soap opera. But pranks have motives. That bridge arrived under the cover of night. And it was not Denise's handwriting people saw on the deliveries, it was someone with the HOA access codes. That changed the tenor. When you find out the people who claim neutrality are actually pulling strings, the game gets a lot less friendly. We reviewed the trail cam footage, because that's the way of the world now. At 3 a.m, a black pickup rolled up, someone with a maintenance badge slipped off, hauled the bridge across, and drove off. The badge matched the HOA president's company. Names that had been polite suddenly had handles. Douglas Penn. He's the one who sent the note that maintenance had installed a safety crossing. He's the one who wrote checks and asked questions later. The trail cam doesn't do tone or motive. It only does fact. And facts have a way of unspooling a neat story into a messy one. When the board saw the footage, there was a flutter, not quite nerves, more like the sound of a respectable machine catching a pebble. Douglas tried to keep ahead of it with a statement about miscommunication. Denise went into full victim mode and spun an Instagram post about community access. The neighborhood divided into factions, the ones who wanted peace, the ones who wanted convenience, and the ones who wanted to feel like they belonged to something important. I began to realize the fight wasn't about my field alone. It was about who got to define the rules for everyone. I don't pretend to be flawless. I'm proud in a way that makes people sigh. I keep secrets in the way old men do, like knickknacks in basements. But I do try to be fair. So I offered a compromise, a legal, properly documented path, gravel laid by a licensed contractor, insurance, a gate with codes, the kind of compromise that reads well in court and even better in a town meeting. Denise refused. She wanted the bridge, the symbolism, the convenience. Douglas wanted to save face. Some people want meaning more than they want peace. The hearing that followed was part theater, part small county bureaucracy. There were affidavits, a stack of emails, and neighbors who read their statements like they were auditioning for a jury. I spoke about stewardship, about how land is a ledger you mark with deeds and fences and respect, not a public sidewalk you edit to your convenience. Denise spoke about shared resources and the spirit of community. An old woman from the cul-de-sac, who used to bake pies for HOA socials, stood up and said she'd never seen the porters complain before, but she'd also never seen a bridge that looked like candy before, and that made her uncomfortable. I looked around the room and saw a town keeping its face on, balancing convenience against the slow gears of right and wrong. In the end, we filed for an injunction to prevent unauthorized installations and moved forward with a civil suit for trespass and property damage. It's messy and slow and expensive, and it gnaws at you, the paperwork, the phone calls, the way a handshake can't fix a thing when a bridge arrives in the night. You'd be surprised how much of living well is paperwork. It's not glamorous, but it's necessary if you want to keep a patch of earth the way your father kept it. So that's where we stand, with a trench that keeps the worst SUVs at bay, with a pink bridge that someone hid under the moon, and with a neighborhood that's trying to figure out what community actually means. I don't know if the lawsuit will give me the satisfaction of a winner's name on a docket. I don't know if Denise will ever learn that a smile doesn't make a map true. What I do know is this: you either protect the ground you stand on, or you watch convenience carve across it until all that's left is the memory of what used to be. If you've ever had to plan a line in the sand, not for show, not for spectacle, but to hold on to something that matters, tell me how you did it. Did you yell? Did you file? Did you build something that couldn't be driven over? Drop it in the comments. Tell me if I went too far or not far enough. Share this with somebody who thinks property is just dirt and convenience, or somebody who believes in getting the paperwork right. And if you want to see what happens when a county deed meets neighborhood drama, subscribe, because this one's not done, it's only getting started.